going to try to get for you. Mr. Cummings?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, too, express my sympathy. I thank you to the Tillman family for your sacrifice, and to Ms. Lynch, I thank you for your service, and to you, Dr. Bowles, I thank you. To the Tillman family, Mr. Tillman, you said that you believe that the military was hoping that your family would sink quietly in your grief. I want to thank you for not sinking quietly in your grief. We have an email that was written on April 28, 2004, 6 days after Pat Tillman's death. I don't know if you've seen this up there on the screen, have ever seen this email, but it describes how the White House was asking for information about Corporal Tillman for the President to use in a speech at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I'd like to make this email part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, that'll be the order.
Let me read you what the email said in part. Quote, just received a call from Mr. Curran, White House speechwriter. Mr. Curran said the information is for the President's speech at the Correspondents' Dinner this coming Saturday. It will probably be televised by C-SPAN, end of quote. The next day, April 29, 2004, an urgent communication was sent to the highest levels of the Army command structure, alerting them that friendly fire was a suspected cause of death. This communication is called a Personal 4, that is P4 memo. As I understand it, P4 memos are military communications that require special handling. Mr. Tillman, you probably know more about this than I do, but from what I have been told about P4 memos, they are for eyes-only communications, meaning that the addressee must open it personally and read it immediately. Are you familiar with that? Are you aware of that type of memo?
I am not, sir. I mean, I understand it. I don't know any more than you do. I was a enlisted guy, E4.
I understand.
I didn't get up that high.
I understand. This P4 memo was sent by General McChrystal, who was your brother's regiment commander in Afghanistan, to 3 high-ranking generals, including General Kissinger, head of Special Operations, and General Abazad, the head of Central Command. The P4 memo warns, and I quote, "It is highly possible that Corporal Tillman was killed by friendly fire," end of quote. And it seems to be responding to inquiries from the White House, and here's what it says, and I quote, POTUS, meaning President of the United States, and the Secretary of the Army might include comments about Corporal Tillman's heroism and his approved Silver Star medal in speeches currently being prepared, not knowing the specifics surrounding his death, end of quote. He goes on to express concern that the President or Defense Secretary might suffer, quote, public embarrassment if the circumstances of Corporal Tillman's death become public, end of quote. I would also like to make this P4 memo part of the hearing record.
Without objection.
One question we have is whether this P4 memo made it to the White House, and here's what we do know. On April 28th, the White House asked for information about Pat Tillman for a speech the President was giving. The next day, the P4 memo was sent, stating that Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire and warning the President against mentioning it. When the President spoke at the Correspondents' Dinner, he was careful in his wording. He praised Pat Tillman's courage, but carefully avoided describing how he was killed. It seems possible that the P4 memo was a direct response to the White House's inquiry, and if that is true, it means that the White House knew the true facts about Corporal Tillman's death before the memorial service and weeks before the Tillman family was told. Mr. Tillman, do you know whether the Army ever investigated how high up the chain of command this information went? And second, do you think this ought to be investigated now? You or Mrs. Tillman?
I don't know how far they went up. It looks like they stopped. The Department of Defense looks like they stopped at about General Kinzinger, but it seems pretty disingenuous, and I don't have the answers because these things get piecemealed to us, whether they're leaked to the press or whatever. That's kind of why we were hoping we could get to you guys, because you have that access. My mom is specifically, among a lot of other people, have really worked hard to gather information and try and figure out through all these redactions to figure out who's who. I mean, we're just figuring out. It took us like 9 months to figure out who actually did the investigation. The second one, well, the first one that was also the first official one. So it's tough to get information, and that's why it's a bit disingenuous to think that the administration did not know about what was going on, something so politically sensitive. So that's kind of what we were hoping you guys could get involved with and take a look. I mean, we only can go so far. We don't have access to these people. We don't have access to the unredacted information. We're kind of landlocked.
Well, I see my time is up, but we'll do the best we can.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Can
you,
I say something to that, please?
Yes,
Could I
certainly.
say something to that? I'll tell you what we do know, because, am I not on? Okay. I've been doing a lot of reading about Rumsfeld, and I'm former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, and I believe, just from what I've learned about him as a person and his expectations for his staff, that he would have had this information. He wasn't an individual who appreciated other people contacting the White House without it going to him first. I can't imagine that this memo could have been sent to General Abizaid and General Kinzinger and General Brown with the expectation they would tell the president, because Rumsfeld wouldn't want there to be any direct line, because he liked to be the guy to go to the White House. So I believe that he would have intercepted this memo first of all. The other thing is that he was, he had written Pat a letter, which I don't think he makes a practice of doing that, and it wasn't an extravagant letter by any stretch. It was about a 2-sentence letter. But the fact that he sent Pat the letter, and Pat was a very high-profile individual, he was probably the most high-profile individual in the military at the time. The fact that he would be killed by friendly fire and no one would tell Rumsfeld is ludicrous, because he would have had a fit. I mean, to have it come, be known to him after the fact would have been extremely upsetting to him. And I have read, a particular book on him, but there's a lot of research I've done on the internet, and, this is my conclusion. I have nothing to back it up. I admit that. I have no paper trail, no facts. But just knowing the type of individual and the way he operated, I believe these generals would be absolutely foolish to not tell him.
Mrs. Tillman, you don't know whether it was investigated all the way up the chain of command,
I don't know how far they
but you
investigated
think
it.
that it should be.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.